Welcome to the Erica Russo Show, where we dive deep into the realms of personal development, spirituality, and the power of the mind. Join us on a transformative journey as we explore the art of manifesting the life you truly desire, all while listening to your intuition. Join host Erica Russo, intuitive life and business mentor and best-selling author each week, as we'll embark on a quest to uncover the secrets of manifesting abundance, nurturing a resilient mindset, and tapping into the spiritual dimensions that shape our reality. Each episode will bring you insightful discussions, practical techniques, and inspiring stories from experts and seekers alike. Whether you're seeking clarity in your spiritual journey, striving to shift your mindset, or eager to unlock your full potential, this podcast is your guiding light.
What is up, beautiful people? Welcome to the Erica Russo Show. If you are new here, welcome to my world. I'm so excited to have you. And if you are an OG and you continue to come back, you continue to press play, you continue to lean into your own intuition and just try to live your best life, I love you. Thank you so much for your continued support. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you guys more than you know. I love doing this podcast. I cannot wait to bring this podcast into new directions and new heights, and your support is really what's making all of this. If this podcast is helping you, if it's giving you those aha moments, if it's giving you clarity, if it's making you smile or making you laugh or any of those kinds of things, I would be eternally grateful if you can head on over to iTunes or now Spotify and leave a review. Those reviews allow me to get this podcast to the ears that need to hear it. And now more than ever, we can all agree that the world is a fucking shit show. And these kind of conversations are the conversations that we need to be having. Before you go ahead and click submit, make sure you send a screenshot to me at hello@ericarusso.co, no M, and I would love to send you a free gift for taking that time out of your busy life to support this podcast. So, before we dive into today's episode, I want to remind everybody that I have some amazing classes coming up for the month of May. Starting on May 11th, I will be hosting a trans mediumship workshop. This is going to be epic, and I love doing trans work for the simple fact that it just okay, I'm getting off tangent, but this is how we roll here. So a couple of years ago, I attended a trans mediumship workshop with Tony Stockwell, who is a well-known UK-based psychic medium and teacher, and he is also a trans mediumship teacher. And I was talking to him at the workshop, and I said how incredible the whole workshop was, and how, I've been practicing evidential mediumship for, I think it was going on like 3 or 4 years at that time. And I said, evidential mediumship is beautiful, but trans, my God, you can't even comprehend. And he just kind of looked at me and he smiled and he said, yeah, he goes, evidential mediumship gives us hope, but trans mediumship makes us know. And that still sticks with me. Trans mediumship is an incredible, incredible journey, and it's one where we really let go of any fear or doubt about the unknown, and we know how incredibly intelligent spirit is. So I'm so excited to be hosting a workshop for this specific experience. This will be on May 11th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you are interested in joining, you can go ahead and sign up below. I will leave the link in the show notes. I also have 3 classes coming up. One on May 14th for energy and home protection. This is going to be a good one. I have so many notes for this one. And then I have a breathwork class on May 15th. This is also just an incredible, incredible experience. And then on May 21st, I will be teaching a class all about spirit attachments. So if you would like to bundle those three classes, you can do so. I will leave the link below. You'll get a discount if you buy all three, and you don't even have to be there because I am recording everything, and everything will be emailed to you the next day after the class is done. So, now that that is all said and done, I am so excited to share with you the conversation that I had with Sabrina Ourania. I might be butchering it, but it's a really cool last name. Be sure to follow her on Instagram. She is truly a wealth of knowledge when it comes to all things astrology. I know a lot of astrologers, and I know a lot of it was when I connected with her and we were talking about astrology and how we can start using the power of astrology and the current energy that's within, the current physical world to help us grow our business. I could just see in her eyes that she really has such a deep understanding of the world of astrology, and she's very calm about it, and she really, when someone really knows something when you hear them talk about it. And when I was listening to her talk about it, she has such a great way of just breaking things down and grounding it down for people to make it make sense. Like I absolutely adore soul contracts and human design, and I offer readings on those, but astrology was something that I always believed in, but I couldn't really grasp because there's just so much to it. But talking to Sabrina, it was like she makes it sound so simple. She makes it sound so simple. So be sure to follow her on Instagram because, again, she is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to astrology. We had a great conversation about all things astrology and bringing it into your healing or spiritual based business. You're going to get a lot of nuggets of wisdom throughout this one. So enjoy it, and I will see you guys around the internet. Okay, guys, welcome back to the podcast. And I am so excited for today's conversation. I have today Sabrina Ourania, and I got it right, right? Yes,
Yes,
awesome.
you did.
A astrologer and business oracle, and we are talking all things astrology and business. And I am so excited for this conversation because from my own personal experience with astrology and trying to launch things during retrogrades and everything, I've learned that there is power in just understanding a little bit more when it comes to the stars. So I'm so excited to have this conversation, Sabrina. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. I'm smiling as you're saying this because I thought to myself, we had to reschedule twice because first you and then me, and it was like this is all within this Mercury retrograde that we're presently in. And I'm like, classic,
Yes.
classic. And it helps you just not freak out and not take it like personally or be like, what's wrong? This isn't working out. You just kind of know, like, that's the vibe. Let's just go with the flow with it, which we totally did. But it's like such a perfect example of how it
Yeah.
shows up in business.
Yeah, exactly. We were just talking about Mercury retrograde because it's obviously we are in Mercury retrograde right now. And I think we both came to the conclusion that it gets a really bad rep. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of like Scorpios, right?
Yeah,
Like they get a
totally.
bad reputation. They have
Yeah.
a bad reputation, but at the end of the day, there's both good and bad in every single star sign. And I
Yep.
think that goes with Mercury retrograde too. Like you were just
Mm-hmm.
saying, like new ideas, yeah, probably not. Don't launch them. But, changing things up, maybe rewriting something, doing, taking something old and reviving it, that's a great time to do that during Mercury retrograde. But today we're going to talk about just some things tips and tricks that you can start looking out for when it comes to planning your business. Now, I know I have a lot of spiritual retreat ladies here, as well as coaches and stuff. So this is a lot of great advice that you can start implementing, not just into your business, but into your life today. So, Sabrina, give us what we need to know.
Sure. I tell people, if you're new to astrology, the first place to start is with the moon. And that's because, you don't need an ephemeris or fancy astrology software or anything to know what phase the moon is in. You just go outside at night and look up at the sky and pay attention day after day. Is it growing? Is it waxing and getting bigger? Or is it, in its waning phase and moving toward a new moon? Because it's really helpful to understand that, and the ancients have used this forever, right? Paying attention to the moon as it waxes and grows, that corresponds with the ability for something in our life to grow and expand and reach full moon, which is the culmination moment. And then, begin to integrate and slowly disappear until we get to that seed planting moment that is the new moon. I mean, it's real, like symbolically, it's pretty obvious. And I think most people have an awareness, especially if you're in the spiritual community, you have an awareness of that. Whether or not we're applying it practically in our lives, and there's no like perfect way of doing this, but you want to start a project around the new moon, ideally after it's at its moment of total newness and then beginning, because you're like, this is something that I'm wanting to grow. It's pretty common that people have, like, especially if it's like I do this with my master classes, like a 2-week launch period, and I'll often start promoting it right after the new moon. And then, it's like the ta-da moment where it's like you put it out there, you actually are sharing it with the world, or the event actually is, or something is around the time of the full moon. And that just works really, really well. I find that it's not like you can't do it at the other time of the cycle. It's just that it doesn't necessarily flow as easily. And it might have some adjustments and stuff that happen. And, even me knowing this, I'm not perfect about every time. Sometimes you just got to launch a thing because this is the window of time you have to do it. And so I don't want to scare people from being like, oh my God, I looked at the astrology and now this whole launch that I've been planning or this event that I'm doing is like all wrong, because it's not. And I always really come back to like trusting your intuition. We pick events, we have things going on certain dates because there's kind of a karma in it. But if you have this awareness ahead of time, you can learn to work with it in a way that ideally will make it a little bit more easeful of a process. So yeah, just paying attention to the phase that the moon is in and trying to begin things at the seed planting time, and then harvest the thing you've planted at the full moon time. And then give yourself time for the integration afterwards of like, okay, what did I learn? How do I want to change things next time I want to do it? That's often the phase that we often skip, right? Sort of like we do something and then we jump into the next thing. But, that time of the moon from full back to, waning and back to new is a really good time to be like, how did it go? And just, get your testimonials or whatever that other stuff is that you need to do that sort of helps you prepare for that next round.
I love that. So I predominantly focus on the new moon or the full moon, right? Because there's just so many phases, and those are really the biggest two. But what about the dark moon?
Well, the dark moon is the new moon. That's when it's literally, like, officially speaking, it's when there is no moon visible in the sky. And then new is kind of like, well, right after that, you start to see the little baby crescent. Ideally, you're not really initiating a new project until after you've passed the full darkness of the moon.
Gotcha.
The full darkness time is wonderful for intention setting. But in terms of like really starting to take action on it, I usually encourage people to wait a day or two after you've had the full darkness of the moon before you start. And then, really, yes, there are lots of phases you can look at, balsamic and, whatever, but really looking at just the quadratures. So you have the new, which is the dark, and then you have the first quarter moon, and then you have the full moon, and then you have the last quarter moon. And those quarters are often turning points. So usually if you say you've set an intention, you've planted a seed, you're starting something new off right after the new moon, a week later is often a time where some kind of challenge, or there's some kind of like, all right, put the pedal to the metal around what it is that you began, and you have to actually like, make it work, make it happen, break through, whatever that is. That usually coincides with that first square. Yeah, you've probably experienced that.
I'm like, yep, Yeah,
Mhm,
yeah.
mhm,
I could
mhm, mhm.
definitely see that. It's kind of like the first growing pain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep, yep, yep.
Mm,
And then that integration space that I talked about before, which is also the part of the letting go,
mm.
whatever it is that we've been cultivating throughout that moon cycle. The letting go part really happens at that last quarter where we're like,
Yeah.
okay, well, it was what it was. It either was successful in our opinion or it wasn't or whatever. And now we kind of have to like give it back, let that go and then start preparing for the next cycle. There's another thing about the moon cycle that we don't talk about too much. And I really love teaching about this because not everything happens within a month, right? You don't necessarily
No.
launch something and have the thing within a month. And oftentimes, especially you mentioned retreat leaders, you're planning something. I'm presently planning a retreat right now, 6 months in advance. It's actually, I've
Mm.
been starting the planning now during this equinox, and we're doing the retreat at the fall equinox, right? Um, and so there's these actually larger cycles with the moon. I call them the larger manifestation cycles. So here's what happens. We just had a new moon, which was also the solar eclipse, right? Like a couple days ago in Aries. 6 months from now, we're going to have the complementary full moon in Aries when the sun is in Libra. So
Okay.
there's actually these larger 6 month cycles where really what the seeds that have been planted at this new moon, like, yes, some things will culminate within the next 2 weeks, shorter phase things, but really most of the things that we're building in our life, you're creating an online course, these things take time. And that 6 month window is really helpful because a lot of what we're seeding at any given new moon in a specific sign, whether it's Aries, Taurus, Gemini, whatever, 6 months later, we'll have the full moon in that same corresponding sign. And that's usually when there's a culmination around the themes of what we seeded and
Your
began nourishing.
intention 6 months
Mm-hmm,
prior.
mm-hmm,
That's
mm-hmm.
really good to know. I
It's a
think
good one to
that's the
pay
big thing.
attention to.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Because I think that especially when you are planning like the year ahead, right? Especially with retreats, because the deposit and everything like that and all of that, it's you when you're doing a launch, like an online launch, because that's where I'm at right now, where it's
Mm-hmm.
like it was always a launch, 5 to 7 days, sell, 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 and
Yeah.
then, but now I'm trying to go more into retreats. It's a completely different planning process.
Yeah. Totally. Totally. Yeah. People aren't making I mean, they are making last minute decisions, but the majority of the people that are going to be, giving you deposit to come on a retreat are planning in advance because they have to take
Right.
time off work and the travel plans need to line up and they got to buy their tickets. And, it's not like just being like, oh, yeah, I have I'm showing up for this online event. I just need to get on the Zoom or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more that goes into it. And yeah, you require a lot more of the planning time as well. I think that's 6 months window, even if you're not necessarily launching it at the seed planting, you are usually beginning the behind the scenes planning that you're doing, right? You're
Mhm.
going and looking at the retreat center and you're adding up all the costs and you're dealing with all of that stuff. Yeah, which is what I'm right in the middle of right now. And it's exciting. I haven't done retreats in some years because I have some two very young daughters.
Yeah.
So I've kind of been like not in that space, but I'm excited to be stepping back into that again.
Yeah, it's definitely something that, you start it's funny that you say that because I'm in kind of like a very similar stage in my journey where it's like I always envisioned myself doing retreats. Like I always wanted to do retreats. I wanted to go to Sedona. I wanted to go to Mount Shasta. I wanted to really go to Egypt. I've always had that desire to just do a week-long retreat or 5-day retreat, but I had kids, you know what I
Yep.
mean? And they were younger and everything. But now my kids are a little bit older to the point where they're a little bit more independent and, self-sufficient, where it's like this idea is starting to kind of bubble back into my awareness, where it's like, I think I can start doing this. I think I can
Mm-hmm.
really like start doing this again. And it's exciting because, like you said, it's kind of you're jumping back into it now. And it's such a I don't know. I love retreats. I
Mm-hmm.
really do.
Yeah,
I
it's
had my
magic.
first one like 2 years ago and I'm like, oh, I can do a lot more of these.
And really planning the astrology well. I mean, if you are banking on doing, let's say you do one or two big retreats a year,
Mhm.
you want to make sure that the energy of the moment in time that you're planning this retreat is really supportive of what the goal of the retreat is, right? Everybody has different kinds of retreats. There's plant medicine retreats, there's meditation retreats, there's, sound healing. I mean, whatever your thing is. But it's helpful to really know what time it is from an astrological perspective, ideally ahead of time so that you can, we call it electing a chart. So like picking dates and times that would, for this window, maybe it's a 4-day retreat, a week long, whatever, that might really optimize what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And actually that the astrology itself is supporting the goal of what the retreat is, and if not the case, say you already planned the dates or you really didn't have any wiggle room around what the dates are, knowing the astrology can be really helpful to help you just know what to expect and to encounter, and maybe even how to plan the scheduling of it. So like, which day of the retreat do we do the Temescal Sweat Lodge, and which day do we do the horseback riding trip, or the sound healing journey, or whatever that is. Because you can look at the day's astrology and be like, this is the vibe. Like, I'll give you an example. This is a really funny one. I'm just thinking of off the top of my head, but I've led women's new moon circles for a very long time. And I always find that when the new moon is in Gemini, or the moon in general is in Gemini, people are very sociable and chatty. And those are often the ceremonies where it's hard to kind of get everyone to like go within and just like quiet down. And every time there's like a pause, everyone just starts like chattering, which isn't the case with other moons necessarily. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like a new moon in Cancer, or I don't know, Capricorn or something. I feel people are generally a little bit more introverted or serious, or like, but the Gemini moons, it's like you kind of like you have to sort of rein everybody in, because otherwise like all these conversations like want to happen. So for instance, if you're doing a silent meditation retreat, or, this is like such a very, very rudimentary example, but it's the first thing that came to mind. Like, I would be like, is the moon or a lot of planets in Gemini? Because it's going to be really hard to not talk, or that kind of a thing, or just to settle the mind. Because Gemini is like a lot of mental chatter. It's like to-do lists and da 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 da. So it's like, it seems so minor, but it can really help if you are aligning your intention for the space, the retreat, the event, whatever it is, with what time the quality of the time is, according to astrology. So, I definitely encourage people, if you're planning events, I do, consultations with people to look at, when's the best date for, launching my program or doing my retreat, and they give me different windows of time. But it really helps to have an astrologer, or if you, are up to the challenge, like, do the research, like find what the big transits are that are happening that day. I think we mentioned before we got on the call, like there's a lot of journals you could buy that will just, or like the Chani app. I feel like everybody knows about the Chani app. But yeah, well, that'll just sort of be like, hey, this is what's going on this day, and factor that into what's going on, and at the same time, I think also really trusting your intuition, because even if you don't know what a transit is, but you get a vibe. I find so many clients I work with are just so intuitive that they get the feel of a time. They're like, I really feel like it's supposed to be this day or something. And they don't know why, but then we look at it and it's like, well, that makes perfect sense. And that's why I love working with intuitive clients, because they're so onto it, but they don't know why they're onto it. And I just like help explain it and then just validate for them what their hunch was all along anyway, but it really can make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So moon phases, what is another thing that we should look out for when it comes to properly growing and planning our business?
So when it comes to the moon phase, for instance, this is something that everyone is experiencing collectively. Like we all are going through the same new moons and full moons at the same time, but how they affect our personal and individual charts is very specific to your birth chart. So if you've never had a birth chart done, it's helpful to do. I mean, I highly encourage it anyway, because obviously I'm passionate about this in astrology, but it helps you understand, okay, based on what type of offerings you're doing, or even what niche you're in, there are certain signs that align more with that energy. So let me give you an example. Okay, let's say you do, womb healing work with mothers, or you're preparing women for fertility or something like that, which is actually a work that I used to do in the past. Working with a really feminine sign like Cancer, that is related to the archetype of the mother or something like that. And so, for instance, if you're thinking about launching a program tied to that, doing it when there is a moon in Cancer or a new moon starting in Cancer, makes sense. also, if you've done your whole chart, you have an understanding of your houses. And I won't get too into that in case that's like really over some people's heads. But, you know, in astrology, we have the planets, we have the signs, we have the houses, we have the aspects. Those are like the four main kind of cornerstones of understanding astrological charts. But the houses are like areas of life or fields of experience where the planetary energies, both from our birth chart, but also in the transits, which is like where they are in any given moment in time, are being activated. So, for instance, if you have your 10th house is the house that deals with your career. And if you have a specific sign, everybody has a certain sign on their 10th house cusp, and you want to make big moves in your career, starting a project at the time where there is a big lunation, a new or a full moon, or maybe other planets that are transiting that sign, and then that the 10th house in your chart would be like, there's already going to be energy happening in your career at that time. So it makes sense to work with the energy that's happening. So I'll give you an example. Like I did a big pivot in my business last year because I had Saturn. He's still there because it takes him about 3 years before he moves from one sign into the next, but he's been in my 10th house of career. And I just had this feeling that I was going to be making a change there, and I would really be setting the foundation for this like next 30-year cycle, really, but around my business. And so I knew that ahead of time, but I wasn't sure what the thing was. And then some other transits happened later in the year that kind of activated that. But because it was happening in my 10th house, and I know my 10th house is connected to my career, I already knew there would be some energy there. And so you can use that by deciding, like, okay, this might be a good time to make a pivot, to start a new business, to, put effort into something in my business. Another example I'll give is I'm working with a client right now who's writing a book. And they have these really beautiful planetary transits happening later this year in the 9th house. And the 9th house is the house that deals with publishing. So I recommended, hey, this is a good deadline for you to be done, and that we start actually working on getting this book published, because that's where the energy is. It's a great time for publishing for you, And I think it would have probably happened that way anyway, but it also helps them to be like, okay, I want to make sure that by like November that I have this stuff done, because in November, this is when these alignments are happening in my 9th house, this is very specific to each person's chart. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes, it makes sense. So I have a question because my son is a Taurus, and we were just saying how my 10th house has Taurus, and it's also my midheaven. What does that mean?
What does it mean to have it in your 10th house?
Yeah.
Or have your midheaven there? Sure. Okay, so the 10th house is the house in your chart that deals with, I consider it like your purpose in relation to your career or your calling. It is the house that deals with your reputation, your legacy. And so kind of like what I was just explaining, like when Taurus season comes around, which we're about to enter into, right?
Yeah.
We're currently in Aries season. Pay attention. And this is a great thing for anybody to start taking note of, is like, when we're in this cycle where the sun is in that sign in Taurus for you, is there always a focus on your career? Is it always a time where because the sun, what the sun does is he illuminates, right? So he shows up and he literally shines his light in whatever area of your chart he's showing up in. So as he goes through all 12 of the signs, he's lighting up each month a different area of your life according to the houses. And so you might find, thinking back, oh, I always have some new development in my career in Taurus season, or around my reputation, or, whatever, and probably something activated for your son too, given that that's what sign he is. So that's a good way to just start experimenting with this, is less,
Gotcha.
You don't have to immediately start taking action. Astrology is all based on observation. So the best way to do it really is being like, I like getting your chart done, looking at which signs you have on each house cusp, and just paying attention to, okay, during the time of the year when the sun is in this sign, is this area of my life something like, do I always have a theme when, okay, so in your case, because Taurus is in your 10th house, that means you have Scorpio in your 4th house. So the 4th house is the house that deals with your home and family. Scorpio season, do you always have some kind of thing? Do you move? Is there always like home stuff, family stuff going on during that time? Because these are those patterns that once you begin to identify and recognize them, then you can now benefit from that by planning ahead and utilizing them in a productive way according to what your intentions and your aims are.
That makes so much sense. My husband is a Scorpio, and my youngest son is a Scorpio. So during Scorpio season, yeah, it's pretty busy here.
Yeah,
it's pretty busy. Yeah.
family time. Totally. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that would be different for everybody. You know, other people have Scorpio in their, I don't know, you could say they're like, for me, it's in my sixth house, which is my house of health and day-to-day routines. And I find for whatever reason around Scorpio season, I tend to be like committing to some new dietary thing or workout program or whatever. And it's like, which is weird because that's not like the time of year you would think. Most people like springtime or like New Year's, you know, time to, but like for me, it is a time that I focus on, you know, my daily routines and my health habits and stuff. So, you know, that's kind knowing these things can help you hack your life in general. But with business, it's really helpful because you get to utilize the energy of what's already happening and wanting to happen, which means you always get to sort of flow with the current instead of trying to swim upstream. And as a business owner, so much feels like you're having to do it all on your own anyway. Like and you know what I mean? And like muster the energy and the willpower to like, you know, I was up late last night just being like, I have to write this week's newsletter and I didn't do it, or like, you know, it's like that kind of stuff. But if you can align it with times that can just make it a little bit more easeful for you, like even just to go back to the moon thing, the first practice I did when I started like really utilizing astrology for myself. So I was like, I don't know, maybe 19 years old. I was taking like a priestess training course. And at like a local, it was like before I was things like that were happening online so much. It was like at a metaphysical bookstore that was like 45 minutes away from my house. And I went every week and it was like so exciting, you know, I loved it. It was so cool. But one of the first things she had us do is we were given this like journal that we were writing the moon phase, but also the moon sign, and then just taking note of how we felt physically, emotionally, mentally, you know, and any other notes. And like if for women, what's up with your cycle, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I remember after like 3 months of doing that, these specific patterns became glaringly obvious to me. It was like every time the moon's in Scorpio, I fight with my boyfriend who had a lot of planets in Scorpio. Like we always fought, but then the moon would move into Sag and it was like all was forgiven and we were great and we'd like move on. And you know, up to that point, it felt like every month when the moon was in Scorpio, we were going to break up. You know what I mean? But then as I saw this, I was like, oh no, like give it another day. It'll move into Sag. We'll be fine. You know, it's just, but you know, so that was one. And then I would realize things too, like, oh, okay. You know, when the moon is in Virgo, is when I feel more like detail oriented. Maybe it's a good time to like plan to write my papers. I was still in college, you know, like to write my papers at that time. So like, hey, my assignment is due at this date, you know, let me take a look at what moon sign really aligns with me focusing on getting this thing done so that I do it then instead of like procrastinating and doing it the last minute before, which may or may not be in a sign or at a time that is really supportive for that. So that was where I really began doing this practice like 20 something years ago, really like grounding in doing this. So I really encourage people to just start with the moon and begin to take note of, you know, what moon phases and signs really help you feel most active in your business in certain things. Like if you do a lot of calls with clients, you know, generally speaking, moon's in Gemini, you know, or moon in Sag, or, you know, Libra are great times because you're more sociable, you're more, you know, it feels like it's easier to flow and communicate with people. You're attuned to the needs of other people or whatever, you know, versus maybe a day when the moon is in Virgo or in Capricorn, when it's sort of just like buckle down, deal with the hard tasks I have to do and the admin work I don't like to do, but I got to get this stuff done. Or maybe when, you know, you're in a more creative phase and maybe the moon is in, I don't know, Pisces or a fire sign or something that maybe inspires you. And you're like, I'm going to work on the design of my website or make a really beautiful post or, you know, something like that. And everybody's based on your natal chart, you know, and how you relate to these archetypes, they're each going to feel a little different, but there's also general things we can say about them, you know, and that might help you, you know, week by week, month by month, plan out when is the best time for me to, you know, put time aside to do certain tasks versus other ones. So I have like a monthly membership and called the Disciples of Delphi. And each week I send out a transmission. And the goal is really to say that, to be like, okay, here's the vibe Monday, here's the vibe Tuesday, here's like, these are things you might want to focus on. Like, don't try to do your taxes on Wednesday because we have this, you know, Neptune Mercury thing going on. Like, you're going to have a hard time concentrating. Maybe it's a better day to do something artistic or creative, but not like detail oriented, you know? those are the kinds of things that can really help you. And, you can plan ahead, but also even just like a week ahead to just get the lay of the week and start to plug and play where you might want to do things to make it a little bit more easeful on yourself.
I love that because it's as simple as just getting a journal, finding out where the moon is, if the moon's in Scorpio, and just really, and I think this is how you're going to really understand that astrology is real. And I loved how you called it a life hack. I loved how because that's really what it is. It's like human design too, and reading your soul
Mm-hmm.
contract. It's a life
Mm-hmm.
hack. It's not going to give you every single one of your answers. It's not going to, share with you your overall life destiny and who you're supposed to marry and how many kids you're supposed to have and where you're supposed to be. It's never going to give you that, but it is a life hack. It's going to make your life easier once you begin to understand
Mm-hmm.
the energy that is present.
Mm-hmm.
I
Totally.
loved that, like when you said, like, oh, when the moon is in Scorpio, this is what kind of transpire. And it's like, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, it starts with just observing, which is why
Yeah.
you kind of have to do that reflection. Like if you're a journaler, I encourage you to add this in your journaling, and just see 2, 3, 4, 5 months in, you will see patterns. I assure you, you will see patterns, and even if it's just the moon you're looking at, you will definitely see patterns. And then how do you then start incorporating the natural? This is what the month and the moon going through all 12 signs feels like for me. How do you start utilizing that information in a productive way versus sort of just being in the flow of it? I mean, to me, it's very similar to women tracking your cycle, because I think that's such a game changer. For a lot of women, they don't pay attention, or maybe they've been on birth control and it's been kind of, controlled in this way. But, knowing like, hey, my blood's going to start tomorrow. Like, it's probably not a day I want to have a launch. It's probably not a day I want to like do a bunch of podcast interviews. Like, I'm not going to want to do that. And
Yeah.
the moon is the same because they're all very connected. But yeah, it's just like the next level of that.
I love that. Now, what are certain transits that are good and bad when it comes to launches?
Okay. That is going to be very case by case according to what you do, what your niche is, what your thing is. Because, for instance, yesterday, we were talking about this a bit beforehand. Yesterday is a good example. There was a conjunction between Mars and Saturn. Now, in traditional astrology, Mars and Saturn are called malefics, which is like mal, bad, and they have this energy of sort of being like challenging. But Mars is also your drive, your courage, your willpower, your like vitality. And Saturn is about the long term. Saturn can feel like obstacles and like, ooh, there's a blockage here, or ooh, this is hard work that's being required. But it's also the planet that supports us in reaching our long term goals because he invites in discipline and commitment. And any entrepreneur knows, like, you don't really have a business unless you have consistency and dedication and discipline and hard work behind it. It's not like you know, I don't know. That's
Yeah.
just not how it works, right? So, you know, depending on what you're intending to do with your business, yesterday's transit could be incredibly frustrating, or it could be like, I'm going to literally sit down and do the things that I know are frustrating, require my attention and dedication, that feel hard and I don't really like to. And and this is what's helpful is like, if you know the astrology, that it might just feel that way. You're like, oh, this is like the hardest work day I've had. I'm just doing the stuff that I don't like to do, but I have to get done. And but what you are also aware of is that you have the drive to keep pushing through, and that what you do set out to do during that energy, because of Saturn's involvement in it, will have lasting benefit, will have laid the foundation for something like needed to happen, right? And like you have to do the hard work to live, you have to build the website before you get to have a cool website, you have to do that stuff. So I can't really say like black and white. When it comes to, a transit for business for, financial growth and opportunity, like I always want to look at like, what's Jupiter doing? Because Jupiter is about abundance and expansion. I want to know what Venus is doing, because Venus is quite literally money, you know? So, if you have a if you work in finance, even more so, I want to know what's going on with those. It really is very case by case and really depends on the nature of the field you're in, what your offering is that you're talking about, what part of your business you're actually working in any given time. There is no, I mean, overall, and you sort of said this earlier, there really is no good, bad signs. There's no good, bad transits. There are ones that are more or less comfortable. But if you pair the right task with the right transit, you're going to have a better result. And that may literally mean I'm taking the day off. You know what I mean? It may literally be that this is a transit that I took Monday off, and I was sort of pitying people secretly that had to work on Monday because of the eclipse. Cause I was like, solar eclipses, nah, I'm not putting anything on my table. I'm like, I'm not doing anything. And I had my neighbor being like, oh my God, I have all these clients in from out of town and I have to meet with them. And I just thought oh, I'm so glad that I planned myself in advance.
I know astrology. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because I would still be feeling exhausted. I mean, those are things that I'm used to experiencing with eclipses too, is very tired, and that the energy is always so introverted internal that it's harder to do the thing. If you have to do it, you have to do it, and you can make it happen, and people have the willpower, you can push through. It's not like it's impossible. It's just it's less comfortable. So if you have the flexibility, and that's one of the things we love about being business owners, right? We want the freedom and the flexibility to decide what we do with our schedule, how we use our time. It's a lot harder to apply astrology to a business that, where you're a salaried employee and you're expected to be places at certain times and you don't get to decide what tasks you're doing on what day. This is really a tool that is most, you can hack it the most when you're liberated in this way, when you really have that kind of freedom behind it. And that's, this is one reason why I love working with entrepreneurs, or people who are trying to transition into entrepreneurship, because I'm so much more is available to you, from hacking your month to, knowing you take off dates as a woman when you're bleeding, so you don't have to work those days, to knowing when you get to plan certain things according to what really feels in alignment for you, your own energy and your birth chart. So yeah.
Yeah. It's like I said, I know the power of astrology, and I've done all of that and stuff. And it just, for me, I think it's overcrowded. And I'm not saying, you know what I mean? Just this astrologer saying this astrologer saying this astrologer saying this. We're to the point where I think, and I know a lot of people will get frustrated.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But you've really done a great job just dumbing it down, just being learn the moon phases.
Yeah.
Start with step one.
Totally.
You know what I mean? Stop listening to, this and that, and this is conjunct, and this is here, and this is there, and everything like that. Start with this, because I do think that it's something that it's baby steps. You know what I mean? Because I know oftentimes people, they're interested in astrology, and then they try to learn it, and then they just shake their head and they just get frustrated and they walk away. But I think the way you've explained it is just get a journal, see how you feel, because that's the best way. We learn from experience. So if you can go and say, okay, the moon is in Scorpio and my husband's an asshole, you know what I mean? Or something along those lines, it's giving you that personal experience with that sign, with that moon phase, so you can understand it for the rest of your life. It's so simple. It really is.
I love hearing you say this though about the overcrowded thing, because when I got into astrology, that was not the case. Millennials, our generation, really changed how astrology is used in the world. I was starting to write a post today that I haven't finished yet, but it was kind of along the lines of if someone had said to me 20 years ago when I was first starting to read charts that astrology would be this accepted in the mainstream, that I would be an astrological advisor to really large companies and startups, especially in fields like psychedelic research and stuff that was also sort of super fringe and illegal and not happening, I would have not believed that at all, but it's become so much more mainstream that, to your point, yeah, there's a million YouTube channels. There's so many TikTok influencers who are into astrology, and to various levels of, you know, experience and knowledge and whatever, and then it's hard to kind of weed all that and be like, does this person know what they're talking about? Or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's hard to know. But that was not the case. When I got into it, it was like you had to go to like the weird new age section of a
School.
bookstore. Yeah. Or the metaphysical store, and they had like, maybe 20 books on astrology, and you just took the books out, or you went to the library and you got them, and um and it was a much slower kind of a practice. I imagine I would have a harder time if I started getting into astrology now, because I would have had that feeling you're talking about the overwhelm,
Yeah.
where it was not like that 20 years ago, at
Yeah.
all.
No, nobody
So
knew it. Nobody knew
no,
it back
no. And if
then.
you started talking about, I mean, I grew up on the East Coast. I'm on the, and then I moved to the West Coast. West Coast, everybody I met was like, knew their sun, moon, and rising. And I was like, this is cool. People were so open to it. But I came from the DC area and the East Coast. And yeah, like 20, 15 years ago on the East Coast, like, people just, the moment you're like, I'm going into astrology, they're just like, okay. And I'm sure that's changed. But I feel like, I like, you had to really own it, because you were weird if you were into that. And definitely not like, there was no having conversations about how you were, you had to be really ahead of the time and super visionary if you were using astrology in this way that we're talking about right now, which is what I love about it. It's actually so exciting, because going way back in time, right? The the foundations of astrology, like, people didn't know what time they were born. Okay.
Yeah.
There was not, you know what I mean? You didn't get a birth certificate. Everyone was born at home. You know what I mean? There was no clocks or digital clocks in anybody's house. They were like, where's the sun? You know what I mean? Think
Yeah.
about this for a minute. Like, people didn't know what time they were born. So doing a chart in the way that we have the ability to do now, with the software that we use to do it, like,
Yeah.
I wouldn't even have been able to be an astrologer, because I took a course on how to like do charts by hand and the math and everything behind it. And I mean, it took me like 4 hours to do a chart, and I still messed a lot up. Like, I never would have been able to do it, because
Oh
it
my God.
requires more math and science than I really enjoy doing, And now I get to just use astrology software. It's like a big cheat code, right? But back in that day, the only people who had exact times of birth and could and had the afforded the opportunity to have an advisor, like an astrologer, to help you, were the kings and the emperors and the pharaohs, because when they were born, it was like, no, they made a big deal.
Mhm.
They knew when they were born. That information was recorded because it was important as an issue for the state, for the country, for the
Yeah.
nation. And so the people who got to use astrology to make big decisions, like launching a war campaign, right? Or something like, we're talking about launching, a program for our business, but this was the types of things that they were using astrology for, that not just affected them, but affected entire nations and countries. It was the tool of people in power. And
Yeah.
now, for the first time ever, we, the average person, can use those same tools to empower us to make the decisions in our lives in ways that we did not have access to before, because the common people did not have that type of insight or awareness. So I really do see it as a tool of liberation, where what was available to the few is now available to the many. And we get to be the kings and queens of our own realities by using these tools in our lives. Does that make sense?
Oh my God, it makes so much sense. I was going to say that I've always heard the term millionaires don't use astrology, billionaires do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
And
love
that
that.
was, oh my God, who said that? I believe that was JP Morgan Chase, who was
I think
billionaires.
so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I love all of this. I love all of this. So I'm going to ask you to share your personal pieces of wisdom, whether it's for astrology or healing or embodiment. What are three pieces of advice that you would give someone who's just starting their spiritual journey?
Ooh, all right. Let's think about this right now. Um, okay. Step one, in my opinion, is kind of quieting the noise and really just listening in and being observant. Because I think what often happens with people with their spiritual journey is that we discover a new spiritual practice or a teacher or a guru or a book or something outside of ourselves. By no means is that bad. We often need a teacher, a book or something, but we usually, I feel like what often happens is that then immediately a lot of power is given toward that direction that can teach us things, but also can take us away from ourselves. And this is kind of what I was saying about with the astrology is like, the first step is just like observing the patterns that you have, So I think a lot of it is like spending time with yourself in reflection, I feel like even just a daily practice of like journaling for yourself, like where was my head today? What kind of came into my field? Like, how is this sitting with me? How am I processing it? Whatever, is more valuable to me, in my opinion, than going and meeting with different teachers every day and like having this sort of extrovert, because everyone's spiritual journey is different and unique to them. And like, I really see that when I look at people's charts. It's like there's no template for enlightenment, in my opinion. There's no like, this is the way to, and if you just follow this easy steps that I followed, you're gonna, it's like, it doesn't work that way. Just like there's no easy template to get rich. It's like everyone has their different wealth codes. Everyone has their different calling that help, so when it comes to like spiritual growth and development, I really think only you have your answers for that, but you have to spend enough time with yourself, to even find those answers. And if you're looking for it externally, there's always something else to seek after and chase after and look for. And that ultimately will be a never ending, like chasing the carrot kind of a situation, which it is for many people. I mean, I know for me, I would have considered myself a seeker for a long time. I lived at different ashrams. I did all this thing. And to me, it was very much like an important part of my journey. But I think what I ultimately landed on was like, I learned a lot from all of these traditions, but to really find truth for me, I have to go within. So I don't think I broke it down into 3 steps, but to be honest, that's like the one I want to keep with, because I really feel like that's at the core of it.
Yeah. When I was developing my psychic and mediumship abilities, that was my biggest thing was I never wanted to give anybody the answers. I'm like an accidental psychic medium. Like I will say that I just started meditating and spirit started showing up. So I was like, let me try this. I never wanted to give people the answers. I never wanted to say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, he's going to call you. I never wanted that. I wanted to give people the tools that helped me understand myself and help me elevate my life and just be happier, be a better mom, be a better wife. And that's really like, I love that you said that, because I think that especially when you're new, like very new, you're in that dark night of the soul and you're in that stage where you hit rock bottom, but now you're excited and you're reaching and you're getting the books and you're listening to the podcasts and you're following the spiritual entrepreneurs and everything like that. You're reaching externally. And that's, like you said, it's not bad, but just be aware of it, because at the end of the day, it is a solo journey,
Yep.
So that's great.
Yeah. I can really relate to you on the not wanting to like be the person giving other people. I mean, that's one reason why I love teaching. Like I do master classes every month. I currently am in a 12-week, teaching a 12-week program that's like teaching people the astrology foundationals and basics, because I think, not everyone has a desire to learn. There are certainly people who pay me to be like, just tell me what to do, but even then, I really want them to know why I'm giving the advice that I'm giving, because, in my case, like I do have intuitive skills, but I don't consider myself a psychic. For me, astrology is a language. And so I'm like a translator. And so I'm like, this thing says this, I'm just trying to explain why my advice is this, because I'm looking at this and I want you to see what I'm looking at. So, one, I'm not just like flinging it out of thin air, but because I feel like, why not empower people with these tools, Yeah. And I think a lot of time too, especially when people have never come to an astrologer, most of my clients are not like this. Most of my engagements are very dialectical. They tell me a little bit about what's going on, and then I look at their chart and we do this, in this conversation together. We are literally on this journey to figure out the answers together. And that's what's really fulfilling for me. But, some people show up and it's their first time doing a reading with the astrologer. And so they're sort of like, just tell me about it, And I'm like, yay, like that's not really how it works. And I'm, once again, this is that giving that power external. I'm like, even for me, don't give me your power. You know what I
I don't
mean?
want it.
Like, I know I'm not interested in that, but I can help you on this journey. We could do this together, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Love that. Guys, be sure to follow Sabrina on Instagram. This was great. Thank you so much for coming on. Um, this was so good. I have so much. I feel like I just went to school. Like, honestly,
Hey,
I'm like, okay, I do really need to focus on the moon phases now. So, guys, be sure to follow her. All of her information is going to be in the show notes for you. Thank you so much for being here.
thanks for having me.
Yeah.